All right, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be talking about multi-level modeling.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah, right. Super fun. We've got this article from Organizational Research Methods,
Okay.
an expanded decision-making procedure for examining cross-level interaction effects with multi-level modeling.
Catchy.
Yeah, super catchy title. Written by Herman Aginnis,
A Guinness.
and Stephen Andrew Culpepper.
All right.
And basically, this paper is all about how researchers decide if they should be using multi-level modeling.
Okay.
So, you know, it's kind of like a fundamental question that a lot of people have when they're working with data that has like a nested structure.
Right, like employees within teams.
Exactly.
Or students within classrooms.
Yeah, or, patients within hospitals.
Mhm.
And so traditionally, researchers have used this thing called the intra-class correlation, or a row,
Right.
to basically decide like, hey, is there enough variation between these groups to warrant like actually doing multi-level modeling?
Yeah, that makes sense.
But what Guinness and Culpepper are saying is that Rye might not be telling the whole story.
It's like we're missing a piece of the puzzle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's imagine like a really simple scenario just to kind of illustrate this.
Okay, I'm ready.
So let's say we're studying the relationship between job satisfaction and individual performance.
Okay.
Kind of a classic question in organizational psychology, like, are happy workers more productive?
Right.
And we're looking at different teams within a company.
Okay.
So we might find that, like, on average, there's not a huge difference in performance between those teams.
Right, like some teams are a little bit better than others, but it's not a massive difference.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what Rye would tell us, like, oh, the variation between these groups is not that big.
Gotcha.
But here's where things get interesting. This article introduces a new type of intra-class correlation called R.
R. Okay.
Yeah, and R specifically focuses on the variation in relationships across groups.
So instead of just looking at the overall difference in performance between teams,
Yeah.
RB is looking at how the relationship between job satisfaction and performance itself might differ between those teams.
Precisely.
Huh. Okay, so like in one team, job satisfaction might be super important for performance,
Right.
but in another team, maybe it doesn't matter as much.
Exactly, and that's the aha moment here.
Okay, I'm starting to see it.
Like, ARB could be really high even if Rye is low.
So we could have a situation where the average performance of the teams is pretty similar,
Yeah.
but the way that job satisfaction affects performance is totally different depending on the team.
You got it.
That's wild.
Yeah, and this is huge because it means that we might be overlooking some really important contextual factors.
Right, because if we only look at RA, we might say, oh, multi-level modeling isn't necessary here.
Yeah,
The groups aren't that different.
it doesn't really matter.
But Rob is saying, hold on, there might be something else going on here.
Yeah, like, what is it about those specific teams
Right.
that's changing how that relationship plays out?
Like maybe one team has a really supportive leader. Right.
Who, like, creates a really strong link between job satisfaction and performance.
Yeah. And maybe another team has a super, like, rigid organizational structure.
Okay.
So even if people are satisfied, it doesn't really translate to better performance because they're kind of constrained by the system.
That's a good point.
And that's why RB is so important.
Yeah, it's like realizing that our map is missing a whole bunch of details.
Exactly. It's like we need a higher resolution view to really understand what's going on.
Okay, I'm with you so far.
So what happens when researchers only rely on are they like missing out on some critical insights?
Oh, absolutely. They could be drawing some inaccurate conclusions
Yeah.
because they're only looking at part of the picture.
So it's not just about deciding whether or not to use multi-level modeling.
Right.
It's about like having a more complete understanding of the data
And the content.
and the context. Yeah.
Like, we can't just assume that relationships between variables are going to be the same across all groups or contexts. So Guinness and Culpepper, they actually went back and reanalyzed data from some previously published studies.
Oh.
And in some cases, they found that VARB was higher than RAV.
So those studies might have missed some important group level differences.
Exactly, and that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how many other studies might be overlooking these contextual factors.
It's like a whole new way of looking at data analysis.
Definitely.
And it has implications for a lot of different fields, not just organizational psychology.
Yeah, I can see this would be relevant for like education,
Right.
healthcare,
Yeah, anywhere you have this kind of nested structure in your data.
pretty much.
So we've established that VERB is kind of a game changer.
Yeah, for sure.
But I'm curious, how did Guinness and Culpepper actually come up with this new metric?
Well, they really dug into the statistical underpinnings of multi-level modeling.
Mm.
They really dug into the statistical underpinnings of multi-level modeling and basically realized that by looking at the variance of the slopes across groups, we can actually get a much clearer picture of these, like, varying relationships.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. So it's not just about whether there are differences between groups, but like you said, it's about how those relationships are kind of playing out differently within each group.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so let's say I'm a researcher and I'm working with nested data. What are some like practical steps I can take to actually incorporate rope into my analysis?
So the article actually suggests a more comprehensive decision-making process for multi-level modeling.
Well,
So instead of just like calculating row bit and calling it a day, they're
right.
saying like, hey, calculate both row and row
Got
to get a
us.
fuller picture of what's happening in the data.
It's like getting a second opinion
Exactly.
from a specialist. You want to make sure you're not missing anything.
Yeah, and it's not just about deciding whether to use multi-level modeling or not.
Okay.
Like even if you're not working with nested data, just thinking about herb can kind of spark new questions and hypotheses.
Interesting.
Like you might start asking yourself, I wonder if this relationship I'm studying is actually playing out differently across different groups or contexts.
So it's like a brainstorming tool almost
Exactly.
to like help you think more deeply about your research.
Yeah, and potentially lead to more nuanced findings.
And thinking about some real world applications of this, I feel like this is super relevant for things like leadership development programs.
Oh, absolutely.
Like if you're trying to train leaders to be more supportive, and then you're trying to see, okay, does that actually translate into better employee performance?
Right, and if you find that that relationship between supportive leadership and employee performance like varies a lot across teams,
Yeah.
then it would be a mistake to just kind of apply a one-size-fits-all approach.
Right, because what works in one team might not work in another.
Exactly. And understanding RIVE can help us to tailor our interventions to those specific group level dynamics.
So it's not just about understanding the data, it's about actually using that understanding to make more informed decisions.
Yeah, to develop better strategies.
And ultimately to make a bigger impact.
Exactly.
I love it. This has been super insightful. I feel like I've learned so much about ARB.
Me too. It's a really fascinating concept.
Before we wrap up, any like final thoughts or key takeaways you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the most important thing is to just be curious and to question your assumptions. Like, don't just rely on these traditional metrics like raw.
Okay.
Explore your data from different angles, consider the context, and be open to the possibility that things might not always be as straightforward as they seem.
Love that. Always be questioning.
Always be digging deeper.
Digging deeper.
Uh,
All right, folks. Well, that concludes our deep dive into the world of ARB and its impact on multi-level modeling.
Hope you enjoyed it.
We hope you found this exploration as fascinating as we did. Remember, knowledge is power, and with DR in your arsenal, you're well equipped to unravel the complexities of your data and make a real difference in your field.
And who knows, your discoveries might even lead to breakthroughs that improve lives and shape a better future.
I love that. So to wrap things up, let's go back to that school district example we were talking about earlier.
Okay, yeah.
What if we were looking at the relationship between parental involvement and student achievement?
And we found that call was high.
Right, suggesting that that relationship varied a lot from school to school.
That would be a huge clue.
That would be a big red flag.
It would tell us that something about those school environments is either amplifying or diminishing the impact of parental involvement.
So some schools have figured out how to make parental involvement really count,
Yeah.
and others haven't quite cracked the code yet.
Right, and that's where the real detective work begins. We need to dig deeper and ask, what are those contextual factors that are driving these differences?
Is it the school leadership, the teachers,
Right.
the curriculum, the level of community support? Like so many possibilities.
Exactly, and that's the beauty of IRBI. It doesn't just point out the problem, it guides us towards potential solutions.
It's like a roadmap for more effective interventions and policies.
Yeah, we can start identifying best practices and sharing those insights across different schools to improve outcomes for all students.
And that applies to any field where we're dealing with nested data.
Absolutely. RB helps us to understand that complex interplay between individuals and their environments.
And that leads to more targeted and impactful actions.
For sure.
So to all of our listeners out there, whether you're researchers, educators, healthcare professionals, or just curious minds,
Yeah.
we encourage you to embrace the concept of READ. Look beyond the surface, question your assumptions, and explore the hidden dimensions of your data.
You might be surprised by what you discover.
That's a wrap for today's deep dive into the world of multi-level modeling and the fascinating concept of RB. Thanks for joining us.
And who knows, your discoveries might even lead to breakthroughs that improve lives and shape a better future.
I love that. So to wrap things up, let's go back to that school district example we were talking about earlier.
Okay, yeah.
What if we were looking at the relationship between parental involvement and student achievement?
And we found that ARB was high.
Right, suggesting that that relationship varied a lot from school to school.
That would be a huge clue.
Yeah, like a big red flag.
Yeah, it would tell us that something about those school environments is either like amplifying or diminishing the impact of parental involvement.
So some schools have figured out how to make parental involvement really count,
Mm-hmm.
and others haven't quite cracked the code yet.
Right. And that's where the real detective work
Yeah.
begins. We need to dig deeper and ask, like, what are those contextual factors that are driving these differences?
Is it the school leadership, the
Mhm.
teachers, the curriculum, the level of community support? Like, so many different possibilities.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of RB. It doesn't just point out the problem, it kind of guides us towards potential solutions.
It's like a roadmap
Yeah.
for more effective interventions and policies.
Yeah, we can start identifying best practices and sharing those insights across different schools to improve outcomes for all students.
And that applies to any field
Yeah.
where we're dealing with nested data.
Absolutely. RB helps us to understand that complex interplay between individuals and their environments.
And that leads to more targeted and impactful actions.
For sure.
So to all of our listeners out there, whether you're researchers, educators, healthcare professionals, or just curious minds,
Yeah. Anyone who's interested in understanding the world better.
we encourage you to embrace the concept of R. Look beyond the surface, question your assumptions, and explore the hidden dimensions of your data.
You might be surprised by what you discover.
That's a wrap for today's deep dive into the world of multi-level modeling and the fascinating concept of ARB. Thanks for joining us.